Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mason Bee Cocoon Washing here on the West Vancouver Memorial Library YouTube page. My name is Taren Urquhart, and I am the Arts and Special Events Programmer here / Mason Bee lover. So welcome to what I hope will be a good overview of all things you need to know about Mason Bee Cocoon Washing, whether you have taken home one of our library Mason Bee hotel bungalows from the library for a year, or if you yourself have a house, possibly with natural reeds, possibly with cardboard tubes. We'll go over everything everyone needs to know. So today, we're going to talk a little bit where most of us left off, as this is a discussion mainly geared towards the library lending bungalow project. We're going to just review how much fun I'm hoping we all had this year playing with Mason Bees. We're going to do a really fast life cycle recap, so we're just all on the same page and we know where we are in the life cycle. We're going to go through a pictorial guide of all the different pests, parasites, possible diseases, little visitors that we're going to find when we open our natural reeds or paper tubes, along with the other things you're looking for to make sure you have healthy cocoons, how to see a cocoon, and just know what to discard. Because if you haven't done this before, it can be a little overwhelming, but just know that we're going to get all through this together and you're all going to do awesome. So last year, we started at the West Vancouver Library this great idea we had to lend out small bee houses filled with natural reeds and a little cocoon holder that held 15 to 20 cocoons. And there's a picture of them on the right. Also included a show of all the bags I had set up for a family build your Mason Bee house workshop. We were still in the middle or the tail end of COVID. So a lot of this was done virtually. We had a great fun with that. And I just wanted to include a picture of all the successes we had last year. People were sending in pictures of their lending houses along with other creative houses. As you can see, Lisa, one of our librarians, youth librarians, made a house out of a cornstarch yellow container. Our friend Kevin, who works on the help desk, the red one at bottom middle, he made one out of a Folgers can and some sort of juice can. And then we have a variety, top left and middle. Those are houses you'll often pick up at Wild Birds. And top right, that is Sandra's house. She also works at the library and she put it in a particularly great sunny location. And you can see the bees are just loving it. So lots of successes. I think almost every one of our lending houses that went out had success and Mason Bees returned. Like I said, we're just going to do a super quick return to the life cycle. I am recording this little lecture for you here on YouTube, and it is the end of February. So we are just entering early spring, not too far away from number one there at the top. Soon our cherry trees in Vancouver are going to start blooming, and that is what I call the cherry tree queue for everyone living in the lower mainland. That's when we're going to start seeing our very first males emerge, usually at the end of March in the lower mainland, early April. Of course, this all depends on what kind of weather we're having. I fear that we're in for another cold, wet spring, but fingers crossed. So the males always emerge first, with the females arriving about 2 weeks later. And there you can see the little guy chewing out at number one. Number two, there's a fast mating season of about 2 weeks, lots of activity. And then our female is going to start looking for mud and pollen and nectar resources, and she's going to start provisioning her nesting site. Hopefully it's going to be one of our artificial nesting sites we've provided with her with either natural reeds or paper tubes. Remember, she can't excavate her own hole, so she needs a little help. So she's going to start putting nectar and pollen provisions, lay an egg on them, build a mud wall, and repeat all the way to the front of the tube. Our females are gone by the end of May. Sometimes I see the occasional one flying in June, but then our life cycle is complete for the spring. The eggs are going to start hatching and eating that food provision that the mother has provided for them. They're going to pupate into a larva. They're going to spin a cocoon. And by October, we are now over, I rushed ahead, we are now over at number 6. By October, there's going to be a fully formed adult male or female bee, nice and cozy in their cocoon. Of course, there is no food resources in October for them, so they are going to overwinter in the house we've provided for them. It's very important that they go through that cold exposure. In fact, the crazy snow weather we're having right now is perfect for them. It really signals to them that they are still in that dipause hibernating state. And then once we are just about to exit this number 6 in our February time slot right now that I'm recording this lecture in, and they are going to start chewing out very soon. So that was just a super fast little recap to remind us where we all are right before we start washing our cocoons. Here's a great picture I love, just showing the full life cycle of the mason bee, tucked tight and safe in the artificial tubes we've provided for them. This also shows the pupa. Pre-pupa has made their cocoon. The pupa is not yet fully formed in the middle image, but still tight within their cocoon. And then by October, fully formed adult bee, all the dark coloring has come in and they are ready for emergence in the spring. A lot of people always ask me, why do we have to clean them? Why can't they just look after this naturally? And I just want to reassess, and I want to place to the forefront of our thought again the commitment that we've all taken on in this one-year journey with our little houses, the importance of cleaning. And you will really see it firsthand when you open your nests. But nest monitoring is so essential because we are asking the bees to aggregate in a much smaller condensed space. And it is our responsibility to help them as much as we can to reduce pests, parasites, and diseases. So this is really why I push for people to commit to raising these bees responsibly and learning how to wash them. So let's dive right into a pictorial guide to go through all the different things that you're going to come across when you open your tubes. I ask people to first look at and investigate the mud plugs and caps at the end of their tubes and take a look at what materials have been used. Most of you are going to notice some sort of clay or mud-like material. Sometimes it's a little more clay-based, sometimes it's a little more sandy soil. And those are the ones we're really going to focus on today. But occasionally you will find either macerated leaf or little leaf plugs, sometimes even resin. It's almost kind of a translucent see-through resin tip. We're going to take all of those and place them aside. We're going to deal with them a bit later, but we are going to focus in on those ones with the mud plug ends. And you'll see examples of all these later in the video when I show you how to open them. Here's just a picture illustrating all the different types of mud that the female can go out and scavenge for. Sometimes she prefers a little more sandy. Sometimes she really likes something that is made of dark earth, but it's always interesting to see what she's found in your backyard environment to use. So as I mentioned before, sometimes you'll see these little leafy ends or the macerated pulps, and I said put these aside, but as you can see from that picture at the top, sometimes you'll even find grass or pine needles sticking out the end, and this is a type of grass carrying wasp. And never assume that just because there is no mud plug at the very tip end of your reed or cardboard tube, that there aren't offspring hiding in the depths of the tube. Sometimes birds during the winter months come along and they like to, or especially chickadees, they love to stuff a little seed in the end for later eating. We also have rodents, and sometimes the weather just dislodges the end. So I will show a little later in the video how to always ensure that you are going to investigate and open your reeds or tubes. And I have a few sneaky ways of not destroying the reed entirely because they can be used again. More on that later. This is what we are looking for, the healthy mason bee cocoon. You'll notice rich chocolate frass or bee poop. Those are those little pellets surrounding the cocoon. And of course, the larva has created these while he or she was eating the pollen provision, and then has started their cocoon, and all the poop has stayed on the outside of the cocoon. It's so cool how they do that. There's often this little white fuzzy material on the outside of the cocoon. That's very natural, normal. And this picture shows the mud partitions between each of the very healthy cocoons. Again, more of those tiny little dark chocolate pellets, perfectly normal. Those are the frass or the larval poop. So you're looking for those that really denotes a healthy cocoon. Other things we're going to find in the tubes are uneaten pollen loaves. That's what these two arrows are pointing to. They're often bright yellow. Lately, I've noticed that they also have been taking on a bit of moisture from the environment. So they're often kind of sticky looking, almost like a lump of very hard dehydrated honey. Those are both quite natural. That just means that the egg has not successfully planted onto the pollen source, has perished and has not eaten the food. Very common. Occasionally, I will find them with almost a white coating on the outside. I'm assuming that this is just some mold that has started on the pollen provision, but also quite common. These are things that you are going to discard. Now we're going to jump into some of the pests and parasites that you might find. Again, all of these are very natural, very small, not a threat to people or pets. All you need to do is wash your hands. If you feel more comfortable wearing gloves when you do this, by all means, go ahead. I don't, because I tend to get right in there, but this is something that you are most likely going to observe in absolutely every house. Whether or not you're going to have a mite explosion or not will depend on your colony, but these are pollen mites, also known as the hairy-footed pollen mite. And this is, excuse me, this is one of the main reasons I suggest washing your cocoons and opening your tubes. When that little bee hatches, if they encounter a pollen mite explosion, you can see from this picture on the left, this is a male who has hatched and had to climb through quite a lot of different debris to get to the end of his tube. He's become so laden with pollen mites, those little fuzzy things attached all throughout his body and wings. They're often red, orange, or white. And he becomes so laden with them, but by the time he gets to the end of his tube, he cannot fly. So this is why I really promote washing out the tubes. I took this picture about a month ago. This is something that I commonly find. It's quite natural. The pollen mites have taken over. Their life cycle has co-evolved with the mason bee, almost as a way to keep the mason bee population in check. And what's happened is they don't directly eat or destroy the egg or larva, but they compete for the pollen resources, and they breed like rabbits. And that is what, I hope you can see my cursor here, but that is what all of this fuzzy material is. Those are millions, well, not millions, thousands of pollen mites that have taken over and eaten all the food. So this is definitely something we're going to discard, and I will show you how to empty these out of the tubes shortly. This also shows, they're not off, sometimes they're not kind of this reddy orange, they are bright yellow. And you can see these mud partitions that the mother bee has created have really kept this cocoon right here very safe, and it has developed naturally. But if this bee hatches, she is going to have to climb through all this guck, and she will become covered with the mites. So these are pollen mites that I scraped off of my mason bees here at the top of Lonsdale in North Vancouver. These are the hairy-footed pollen mite, and those bright yellow circles are pollen. And of course, they are just procreating and eating and moving around. And as they are warming up in the ambient temperature of my suite here, they're starting to move a little faster. They're quite amazing little guys. These ones happen to be white with a bit of orange on them. Often the larva becomes almost mummified. You can see on the right picture, they become hard and desiccated. They get this fungi in their intestinal tract and they just cease to be. So if you do find any of these, please discard them. And now we're on to my nemesis. The Houdini fly was recently, maybe within the last 5 or 7 years, was introduced to Canada from the UK. And these have slowly been making their way across Canada. And about 5 years ago, they really had an explosion here on the West Coast. And I had a horrible time with the population taking over my mason bees pre-pandemic. And they were just everywhere. I hate these little guys. If you see anything flying outside of your mason bee house, they like the warmer weather. They have red eyes. Do go ahead and squish them. The female Houdini fly is known as a kleptoparasite, and she will, when the mason bee is out foraging, enter the hole and lay her offspring on the pollen provision. Then her babies will eat the food, whereas the mason bee egg will not have enough food and will perish. These are quite common, unfortunately, in our lower mainland colonies now. So it is super, super important to destroy these guys if you do find them. My mom tends to collect them and feed them to our backyard birds. I suggest, if you can, to pour boiling water over them, something that really kills them instead of just straight into the compost. They are often sticky in appearance. You'll see them. They're often, you will never find just one larva. You will find a conglomeration of them, 5 to 10 larvae all kind of squirming around together. They also produce a fecal material or poop that is kind of stringy. You'll notice it's a kind of spaghetti stringy right here. That's another thing to look out for. So we definitely want to collect those and discard them. And then one more pest that we're going to just briefly discuss is the chalcid wasp. If you see these little guys, they are similar in size to the grain of rice, if not slightly smaller, and they have this short ovipositor sticking out the back end of them, this little hair-like protrusion. They also enter, they are a kleptoparasite, and they enter the tube. They can drill through cocoons. They can drill through the sides of paper tubes. On the left, that is a chalcid wasp that has drilled out, hatching and drilling out of the side of a cardboard tube. And to the right, more little tube exits you can see from the cocoon. When we wash our cocoons, anything that sinks in the water bath is a sign that that is not a cocoon that's going to survive, and we just discard those. So anything that sinks, most likely a chalcid wasp has gotten into that cocoon and we're going to discard it. We will also see some beneficial visitors show up. Not everyone will have these, but they are in the lower mainland, and I was just going to briefly talk about them because this year I did have 2 leafcutter bees visit my natural reeds in my backyard. And instead of using mud, she goes around, collects, and cuts perfect circles or moon shapes out of, yes, your rose bushes. So keep an eye out for those little cut marks on that picture on the left. And she will line the inside tube with little leaf pieces. And when you open the tubes, they almost look like a long cigar, similar to the picture on the top right. I love the picture on the top or the bottom right. She tucks the little leaf piece under her abdomen, much like like she's riding a little flying carpet, and she shoves them in the hole. They are absolutely fascinating to watch, and they are active in warmer temperatures a little after our mason bees stop flying. Again, solitary, native, non-stinging pollinator. Lots of fun to watch. Occasionally, we will have the European wool carder bee show up. So if you open a tube and you find a fuzzy material, sometimes they use lamb's ear. They go around collecting that fuzz off of plants. They use lamb's ear. Sometimes I've found them using insulation from dryer vents. So this is something you're not going to want to discard. But again, if you find anything that you're never quite sure of, just email me, send me a picture, and we'll find out together what it is. You're also going to possibly attract solitary wasps. Again, if you're solitary, you are non-aggressive and non-stinging. And the solitary wasps in the Lower Mainland use a variety of mud and different materials to create their nesting. Most of them are very beneficial. They're going around your backyard, picking small caterpillars, aphids, other small green insects off of your plants. They're going to kind of anesthetize them for their offspring, shove them in the hole, lay an egg on them, and the egg is going to eat these little green bugs they have collected. So if you do see something that looks very wasp-like, you'll notice they usually have a black abdomen, sometimes with a yellow or white stripe. But if they are entering a tube, it means they are solitary. They are not working in a hive formation. So very beneficial to your backyard. If they aren't using mud, they might be using resin. I have some aphid-eating wasps that often visit my backyard, and you can see instead of mud partitions, they are using resin pulled off from pine trees and putting them as partitions between the offspring cells. One of our old librarians at the library, she had a grass-carrying wasp. I've never had one in my backyard, but they collect grass, and you can often see it sticking out the ends of the tubes. They're known for sometimes picking spiders off of plants, and other times picking small grasshoppers and shoving them in the tubes for their babies to feed off of. And just to end our pictorial guide, very occasionally, and I did have a few in our last cocoon washing, people will find out they have a different type of mason bee called the mason bee californica. They also make cocoons, but you will notice that there's quite a yellow consistency around the cocoon. The cocoons do not pull apart as easily, and the frass or bee poop of the larva is much more yellow. And just to show the comparison, on the left here, you'll see the californica cocoon, very yellow, not as defined like the mason bee cocoon on the right. We are not, if you do come across this mason bee, which flies a little later than our blue orchard mason bee, I suggest just keeping them in a separate container. No need to wash them. But also super beneficial, excellent pollinators. So you're really in luck if you have attracted those. A lot of people ask me, when should I clean my house? And I suggest anytime between October and February. We just want to make absolutely sure that those mason bee adults are fully formed and tight within their cocoon. I am a proponent of washing my bees in January and February, or February. I prefer to leave my cocoons and houses out all winter. I think it's very important, I know, to keep them out, to have that cold period, to really tell them how the season is progressing. It's part of their evolutionary process, and I think we should leave them out in nature to follow those guides and cues as much as possible. So that is what I choose to do. If for any reason you have delayed, maybe you've forgotten about a house or whatever, and there's no other way, you have to wash your cocoons in March, it's very possible to do this, and I have forgotten about houses. I just recommend that you do it outside in a cool environment. If you do bring them inside, the males are so attuned to temperature changes, they will start to hatch in your house. And it has happened to me. I have even unrolled tubes close to the cherry tree queue, I call it, and the males have already chewed out and are just hanging out in the tube. So just be aware of that. Many people say, how many cocoons should I keep? I have a small backyard. Do I need 200 or 2,000? Most people suggest that you keep 1.5 cocoons per nesting tube, because you have to remember that of your cocoons that you're washing, about half of them are males and half are females. So you can look at a ratio of keeping 1.5 cocoons per nesting tube. So for example, if you have 48 tubes or nesting cavities, keep about 50 to 75 cocoons. That will give you a nice percentage of males to females. And if you do have a mature fruit tree that is requiring pollination, try to keep at least 10 mason bees per mature fruit tree. Here's a few pro tips from me. I keep upwards of 500 plus cocoons for my little backyard space. So if you have 10 cocoons, great. If you have 200 cocoons, great. They are going to compete for floral resources. So you can keep giving them houses, but you may find that some of them, if your population gets too large, are going to fly away because they simply don't have enough food in the area to sustain them all. However, they probably won't go too far. They'll probably go down the block. And it's always a great time in the spring to go to your local nursery, check out some of the amazing plants that they carry. Often our local garden centers have little signs that say bee friendly. I suggest going to some of the smaller independent stores where they keep a better eye on their suppliers and pesticides and insecticides that are sprayed on their plants. We don't want any of those nicotinoids on our plants. And you can always ask at the garden centers if they're aware of that and if they can provide plants that have absolutely no pesticide or insecticide residue on them. But I have great fun providing a new early spring blooming plant every year to my backyard, specifically for my mason bees. And if you notice your house filling fast, and when I say that, if you notice your mason bees going in and out and those mud plugs are starting to show up on the ends, which means she has fully provisioned that tube and you are running out of housing and it is still early in the spring season, think about adding another house, more tubes, to give your females the best chance at providing housing for their baby. And that is the end of this section. We're now going to go over to me in the Welsh Hall, and we're going to get our hands dirty and we're going to start opening some bee tubes. So see you over there. So here's the little house that you received last spring. I hope you all enjoyed watching your bees. A little note that I told many of you about was to keep a lookout for these little mud splats around the entrance to your house. These are post-emergent poops, or meconium. It is the first poop that the mason bee does right after he or she has hatched. So they exit the cocoon holder inside. They often exercise their flight muscles at the entrance. They climb into a sunny spot on the outside of the house, and then they poop. And there it is. So we know that these bees actually left this house. So let's get into taking this house apart and washing our cocoons. Often I use my pliers at this point because sometimes the cocoons can be really kind of jammed in there, which is great because we don't want them easily sliding out or little fingers being able to pull them out like a raccoon or a rat. So we're just going to pull them out, and usually once we get one or two out, then the rest come out easily. And there they all come. Most of these houses had 8 or 10 of the natural reeds, and then a cocoon holder. So the house is now pretty much ready for the next lending coming up this February and March at the library. All this needs is a little wash down with some soap and water, which I will do when you return it to the library. So here we are with our tubes and our cocoon holder. This is the cocoon holder that I provided about 20 mason bee cocoons in here when you picked up your house. And we're just gonna, I often like to see what's going on inside the holder just for fun. So I often empty it. And yes, indeed, you can see most of the mason bee cocoons have indeed hatched. Lots of chew marks. Sometimes I do a quick little look to see how many didn't hatch, just for interest's sake. It looks like 1, 2. 2 out of the 20 or so didn't hatch, and that's quite common, that a couple won't, but excellent numbers that did indeed hatch. You're just going to put those off to the side. Those can be discarded, put in the compost. As long as there is no visible mold or anything on the cocoons, this holder is ready to go for the next season. So you can just return that to me with the house. So now we have all of our cocoon tubes. I often ask people to give a quick look to see what kind of end caps we have. Very common to obviously see the mud. That will denote that there's a mason bee in there, but occasionally you will see a different material, sometimes macerated leaf or pieces of leaf, that telling us that a different solitary bee is living in there, most likely the leaf cutter. They're not as common as the mason bees in our area, but they do show up occasionally, and I'll show you one a little later in this video. So it's easy to see that these ones definitely have mason bees in them. These 4, not absolutely sure. So I'm just going to put these mud plugs aside. We know there's babies in there, but just because there's no mud plug on the ends of these doesn't mean there's not babies inside. Sometimes the female mason bee will fill up half a tube and then her life cycle will end and she just won't continue filling all the way to the end. Sometimes a bird encounters the tube, will try to stick seeds in there or try to find some insects for a nice lunch. Sometimes the weather dislodges it, and other times it's a little critter. So an easy way to check is I get a bamboo skewer. I find the dull end of the skewer, and I hold it to the back of the node, and then I take a marker, which I have placed over here, and I mark the end. That now tells me the length of the tube. So now I can insert it, and already it's not going anywhere. So I know that there is someone still in there. Let's see. Oh, also somewhere. And you know,
even just looking, I can't see. Sometimes I find a flashlight quite helpful, and yes, that is helpful. I can see that there's a mud plug there, but if it's way at the back, flashlight obviously sometimes won't work. This one, hard to say. There's something at the end there. Sometimes it's just the pithy end of the tube, so I'm going to take a chance and open that one. And that one, there's someone in there. But if, however, any of them, the skewer went all the way to the back, you can just put them aside and they are ready to use for another year. But these are ready for opening. So I absolutely love using these natural reeds. I, for many years, used the paper and cardboard, but having used these only for 2 years now, I've noticed that my bees are cleaner. I have less parasitic invasion from two little critters that we've talked about before, the Chalcid wasp and the Houdini fly. Also, just being a natural fiber, I think the developing mason bees, just like the exchange of air and moisture in a more natural container. Also, the moisture in our environment, being here in Vancouver, the paper and cardboard tubes really suck up the moisture in the air, whereas these natural reeds do not. I'm getting much less mold developing in and around the cocoon. So I highly recommend these natural reeds, and I will put in a link to the supplier I get these from in the description. And one of the cool things that our mason bee mom from the previous year does is she always provides a little space at the front, known as the vestibule. Before she creates that mud plug at the end, she leaves a space, almost knowing that if a bird came along, she wants to protect that first baby. So let's not put the baby too close to the end. Let's leave a space. And we can actually use this vestibule to our advantage when we're opening the tubes. I have learned to take off this outside sheath of the tube. I find that quite helpful for the next step. And then, knowing that there's no offspring in the very end, I'm going to do a quick pinch. And yes, mud often goes flying. And see just that one pinch there. I do not want to push or put any pressure on the rest of the tube, just the front, because there are fully formed babies in there. So you'll notice that it kind of clicks into 4 sections, and then I can pull that apart and open it. Using the skewer, I often just empty the contents of the tube right onto my newspaper. And I discard these tubes. They can't be used again. I put them in my compost. And the cocoons can handle quite a lot of handling. Don't want to be super rough with them. Don't skewer them too much, but they can handle your fingers on them. And then I go through this debris and I kind of feel around and see what looks like a cocoon. I pick them up, I kind of take off the dirt, the frass, which is scientific name for poop. It looks like little tiny chocolate pellets, very tiny. And I'll start putting the cocoons in a pile. We had 2 cells that had been overtaken by mites, and we have 4 fully formed cocoons. Push that dirt off to the side, and let's open another. So again, I'm going to take the outer sheath off the reed. Using that vestibule at the front, I'm going to flick. I often use my chest as kind of a, and then we're going to open. The more you open, the more you'll become familiar with what is a cocoon and what isn't. But I can see cocoon, 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 cocoon. Then we have some sort of just mold there. No one has survived in that space. That's mites that have taken over the pollen source. And oh, there's a cocoon hiding in there. So even though it didn't look like anyone was there, so again, You know, you can just take your fingers. Nothing within these tubes is harmful. The pollen mite, not harmful to humans, just likes to eat pollen. And a quick little clean up those. And we'll do a couple more together. So I always find it interesting which size diameter the mason bee female chooses. This one is quite a large reed, quite wide, but she's obviously decided that that's the size she wants to go in, whereas this one quite a bit smaller, and that's the one she wanted. So again, with these natural reeds, we're providing them, instead of a whole uniform selection of paper tubes, you're allowing her to choose that diameter, that natural diameter that she likes. So a little click against my chest. Oh, this is a healthy one. Look at that, holy moly. Okay, we have that front vestibule of mud, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That is a nice tube. And it's interesting that, you know, the larger tube has provided a bit more diameter, and the bees are almost orienting themselves slightly sideways, giving them lots of room to grow. Not one cell has been taken over by mites. So I'm just going to use my skewer, because they're nicely packed in there. And I'm just gonna, oh, those are such nice cocoons. And I'm pressing down on the tube itself. I'm not pressing on the cocoon, and I'm just kind of dislodging it. These tubes are also nice that they have the node at the back. Very important to provide a nesting tube that has an end, because she will take some of her time and plug that up if it isn't, close to light. So wow, that was an amazing, amazing tube. I love finding these. And look how big. That is a big, juicy female. That's so big. So that was a really nice. And I've talked before in my other video, which I will also, getting started with mason bees and learning how to start your little colony with our library lending program, about how important it is to provide this length of tube. If you provide a very short tube, she will only lay male progeny. But if you provide her with 4 inches or more, I think it's closer to 6 inches, she will lay a maximum number of female bees, which of course are the most important for the next generation. And let's just open one more together. This is that little one. And again, just a quick little pinch. Oh, this one's not as many as that other one, but we'll take it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then so just kind of an empty space at the back. Oh, and there's that beautiful mud plug. I love how there's such perfect little circles. And we're just gonna take everything out, and we're just gonna feel around. Sometimes the cocoon will be a little more crinkly than other times, but I suggest washing all of them. Sometimes the cocoon is a little see-through, more see-through than others, but wash all of them. If they are compromised, they will sink in the bowl of water. And there we have a nice little collection of cocoons ready to wash, and we only opened a couple of the tubes from the houses. So I wanted to just briefly touch upon if you have the paper method. This is a block from our mason bee tree here at the library. It's a wood block with a cardboard tube and a paper liner. I have started phasing this system out because I'm finding that the mason bees love the natural reeds, and the cocoons are much cleaner. I don't know if it's simply because it's a natural material and the cocoons just do better in it. I know that several parasites have a hard time getting through the natural reed outside. And let me see if we can find any that have chalcid wasps attacking them. So I found one that is most likely parasitized by a chalcid wasp. If you can see this tiny little hole in the side, so we will open this up and see what we find. But similar, we know that there's that vestibule at the front again, so we can rely on that to make a little cut with our scissors. And then it's an act of kind of unrolling the paper tube and pulling the cocoons. There is a large mite area. Mite's taken over. This offspring did not survive for some reason. Oh, of course, that is where the chalcid wasp parasitized that baby. Can't see the little wasps in there, but that is where the hole was. So they find it quite easy to, these little chalcid wasps, to sneak down into some of the little crevices of these houses, not so much with the natural reeds. And then we have one more offspring at the very back, which is often the most difficult to get out. I'm just gonna push it with my scissors. So we got, I'm gonna just do one more for you. Do a little snip. There's a beautiful mud plug. Loves, so beautiful. And then we're just gonna unroll. There's one baby, two baby. Some beautiful dark chocolate brown frass. It's healthy larva. And then we have a section what's taken over by mites. We have another offspring. Oh, it's a good tube. And there's probably a female, quite large, and then no one survived at the back. It was another mite-filled cell. Now there was one I put aside for you because I noticed when I was taking this out that there wasn't a mud plug. It looked like resin. Don't know if you can see that, but we're gonna see if a little solitary wasp has used this as their nest, and I'm already noticing some resin pitch on the inside of this tube. Now, usually if I wasn't showing you guys, I would leave this tube as it is, knowing that there's most likely a little solitary wasp in here that is known for picking small caterpillars and aphids off of plants, shoving them in the hole, parasitizing them, and then laying an egg on them. And her offspring will eat the little bugs and hatch out the next spring. Solitary wasp, gentle, non-stinging, non-aggressive. So something we definitely want in our backyards. They usually prefer a much smaller hole. I often ask my dad to make me blocks of wood with just a myriad. He goes crazy with his drill bits, 1/8 of an inch, 2/8, 1/4, and tries to drill them as deep as his drill bit will go. The insects that use these reuse the materials each year often. So if she's using pine resin in between each of her offspring's nesting cells, she or another wasp the next year, that's not her, maybe a cousin, but someone of the same species will reuse that material again and again. So we're just slowly unraveling this. We're gonna see if we have There's always a chance that this is an old. Now I'm noticing some little very dehydrated aphids that are kind of stuck in the pine resin that is still sticky, so I know that this is definitely that wasp that I speak of. I am now getting close to the front of her nest, which is covered with pine resin. So I am going to snip off what I have opened, and I'm going to leave this. I don't want to disturb it anymore. We can't wash it. If we unravel it, they're most likely still going to be in their larval stage. They haven't fully developed. So this again is something that I could pop into a container like this. Or if it's the full length, I could just put it back into the tube and just mark it as something I'm not going to touch, and the babies will hatch out and hopefully come back. And one other thing I forgot to mention was the use of a flashlight is often great if you have the paper tube method. It's sometimes really easy to, you can do the skewer by all means. I've lost my skewer. Here we go. You could mark it and put it in. You can also sometimes hold your tube up to the light. You can sometimes see through it, see how far back. But sometimes you can also use a flashlight to see how far things go down. And since I know someone is in this, let's just open this one for fun. There's the mud plug, so we have one baby. Sometimes you'll notice that the cocoon shell is a little more crinkly than other times. It's a little softer. I say put them all in the pile and wash them. Any compromised cocoon, if it has a hole in it or if it's just not doing well, will sink to the bottom, and you can discard those, knowing that the babies have not survived inside. And I think we have one more at the very end. There we go. If you do have one of these old house methods that take the paper tubes, I would highly recommend placing these, after you've cleaned out the cocoons, placing them in a very low heated oven, maybe at 200 degrees for a couple of hours, just to kill any mites that may still be living at the very ends of the tubes. That is a great way. You could also microwave it, but often these have metal odds and sods in them. So heating them for a couple of hours just to kill any mites, excellent idea. Okay, so let's move on now to the cleaning of the cocoon. I have placed all of our cocoons right off the newspaper and into this wire sieve. I particularly like wire sieves for this very reason. I'm going to do what I call kind of the pre-scrub. I shake it back and forth over a piece of newspaper, and can you see all of the debris that is falling on the newspaper? And this is kind of what I call the pre-scrub. Just gets frass, big particles of mud off of them, and then that can easily be wrapped up and put to the side. Now I do the first rinse. I'm going to dump the cocoons right in the water, and I'm going to agitate them quite vigorously. They are hardy little suckers, and they can handle it. The reason we're doing this is to get rid of mites, debris. Just gives them a really good start when they hatch out. I've been raising them, mason bees, for so long that I'm, in my 25th plus year, and sometimes we have quite a mite explosion, and the cocoons are quite laden with mites. So I do this every year. However, if you're finding that your cocoons look really nice and clean, there's no kind of fuzzy, reddy, orange, white matter on the outside, don't feel that you absolutely have to wash them your first year, but doing what I'm doing right now is not going to harm them in any way. So I then gather them up and put them in my sieve. And I hope you can see that all sorts of things have fallen to the bottom of the bucket. Most of it is frass, poop, there's a mud plug. And that is my first bucket. And often I then do a final rinse. Maybe not so much needed this time, but if you were washing a larger quantity, you might. But I'm still getting a variety of things falling to the bottom. If any of the cocoons had chalcid wasps or anything that had burrowed through the cocoon or hatched out, they would have sunk to the bottom. Very important to always use cold water, never warm. And again, very important to do this not too close to the emergent date, because I have had males start to hatch on me, and often I can hear them when I do this. Here's my paper towel, very useful tool. I kind of do 2 layers, and this is often when I start hearing the little males chewing. You can actually kind of hear them as they start to chew out of the cocoons, closer to their April, May emergence. So I lay them on a piece of paper towel. I'm going to leave them here for about 5 minutes. That's enough time for most of the water to evaporate, like so. So now what to do with our cocoons now that they have rested here for about 5 minutes and most of the water has evaporated. Don't be concerned if they are still a little damp. I've never had any problem with the storage. Even if they're slightly damp, we don't want them sopping. But if you have access to a little container like this, now is the time to take your cocoons and place them in here. For a tube like this, I don't want them to be jammed in there. Think of yourself as a mason bee having to chew out and then crawl through and exit this little hole. So definitely don't want them jammed in there. So for this size container, I'd maybe put 20 in here. Some other ideas that I've told you about, the pill bottle, excellent little container. That would fit quite a few. In a pinch, a toilet roll is an excellent cocoon holder. What I do is I pinch one end and tape it. I put all my cocoons in here. A mix of male and female. Then I punch a little hole. Make sure the hole is big enough for a mason bee to emerge, and bigger is better, like so. And I tape that, and then as long as my house was very much out of the wind and rain, I could then adhere this to the outside of my house, or inside my house if I had. But that is a great little makeshift holder. But be inventive. You can use a yogurt container, a Tupperware container, anything like that. You just don't want it to get overly wet and produce any sort of mold. And you want to make sure that it's out of way of little critter fingers that could steal it. I had one friend who works here at the library, and a raccoon got her Tupperware and carried it halfway across her backyard before she chased it down. So those are some ideas for holding your cocoons. Now, I recommend putting your cocoons back outside as soon as possible, but sometimes people don't have their houses ready to put up or whatnot. So if there is a bit of time between putting your container outside, I recommend putting it in a non-heated area, out of the wind and rain, somewhere where critters can't get it, and just keep it cool. Some people choose to put their cocoons in the fridge. I'm not one that likes to do that just because I can't watch the humidity levels accurately enough. So I just choose to put them outside in a safe location, maybe in a box, a secured box, and keep them cool until I can affix them very close to my new housing. Some leaf cutters that I brought from home. At least I hope they're leaf cutters, because a few people in our washing class last week did in fact have leaf cutters. So let's see if I could show you what you might come in contact with. Ah, yes. Sadly, this tube did not open as well. That sometimes happens, but I hope you can see that. Instead of the mud wall partitions between each of the cocoons, the leaf cutter has gone around and cut out perfect moon or circles out of rose bushes and other plants in your neighborhood and lined the natural reed with leaves, and it often looks like a cigar. And then at the very end, she's put perfect circles. I'll see if I can. She's plugged it instead of a mud plug. These are perfect round circles that she's stacked up on top of each other. And then, let's see if I can dislodge one of these, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 offspring, all tucked away in their little, and then at the end it looks like pollen mites have taken over the end. Occasionally you will find a tube that has both mason bees and leaf cutters in it. Leaf cutters fly later in the year, so often you'll find mason bees halfway up the tube and then some leaf cutters. What I like to do with these is I like to separate them. Same principle, that if one hatches at the back and one at the front does not, it still has to climb and get past its dead brother or sister. So I do like to take the leaf cutters out. However, we are not going to be washing the leaf cutter. And then the mason bee, the pollen mites were at the back. And as you can see, they're kind of separated. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8 leaf cutters, and I'm going to place these in a box and let them emerge on their own. In fact, this is a great time to use my little pill container. I'm going to put all my leaf cutters in here. And when I get home, I will pop a hole in here and I will attach it. Let's say I was going to reuse our house again. I would attach it something like this to the outside of my house. They would exit this holder and hopefully go into the new house you provide. This kind of method can also be used for mason bees.